Greetings, salutations. Today, as promised, I'm going to start working through the Arcana of the Solar Way, Nina Roudnikova, wrong cover. This is my print proof. The first Arcanum is the Magician, and as I've just got these beautiful cards from a friend of mine in Russia, I'll show you his Magician. These cards are hand illustrated by Art Theurg. That's the back. He's just done the Major Arcana. This is the box. It's very nice. And that's Art Theurg. So, the first Arcanum, the Magician, the Divine Essence, the male principle, the nature that determines the numerical designation 1, the astrological correspondence, the sun. In the symbolic picture of the Great Pyramid of Cheops, the first Arcanum is depicted as follows. A human figure with his right hand raised and his left hand lowered stands in front of a cube. In his right hand he holds a rod. In front of him, on a cubic stone, stands a bowl, a sword and a coin. On his forehead is a gold hoop, around his waist a gold belt. This figure, symbolising the subjective consciousness, is crowned and girdled with the light of the One, source of love, and the spirit that dominates the elements of the manifested world. The world in its essence represents unity. The inner essence of things is always the same and identical to itself. The one spirit that pervades all forms and every phenomenon of the world is only the expression of this spirit in form. Every phenomenon of the world is a manifestation of one of its creative possibilities, so the one great ocean of the unknowable spirit is omnipresent, all-pervading, and underlies the whole world. It is the root of all things, and, since our mind is one of the forms of its manifestation, it cannot know its own essence, which transcends the spirit. All forms and names are created by the mind and define some form. The same one which fills all forms has no form itself, and therefore no name. No name can be applied to it. To somehow define it, formless and faceless, he is called the Absolute, the Deity, the Ein Sof, the unattainable, or simply that in Vedanta terminology. It fills all the forms of the world, and at the same time it is infinitely greater than their totality. He knows himself in all great and small creatures, and at the same time surpasses them all in his essence. He is everything in everything, and everything is in him. And yet no infinity of worlds will exhaust his inner possibilities. He is manifested everywhere, and his inner essence moves him. The external unity, the external entity moves the universe and is everywhere manifested as a single force. The universe is love. Love in its manifestation is the desire for unity. Love is essentially the affirmation of a unity that does not exist anywhere in the manifestation. Everything in the world is born of love, abides in love, and expresses love. But often, behind the endless, innumerable forms of love, we do not see its single and all-encompassing essence. This spirit love is what expresses all the infinite variety of worlds. But for its manifestation, love splits the unity of the incomprehensible ocean of spirit into two parts, the subject and the object, which is expressed in their mutual desire for a radical unification with each other. And in the book I've actually used the paper stack, and that's the image. All the best aspirations are ways of acquiring this love. Unselfishness, selflessness, self-detachment are only the affirmation of the unity of love, the blurring of the boundaries between I and you, and the way to unite them. Therefore, one cannot speak of love if one does not realize in the heart that these three messengers of God, unselfishness, selflessness, and self-denial, are to be found in the heart, and love cannot be understood if there is self-restraint within the framework of egoism. The path to God, that is, to the eternal unity of all, to the ocean of love, lies through the stages of their manifestation. Therefore, subjective development, which is so necessary for the acquisition of spiritual values and spiritual knowledge, is essentially a path from egoism to the ever-expanding stages of unselfishness, selflessness, and self-denial, up to the accommodation of the spiritual world, in the spiritual world. The subject of spiritual consciousness is in the heart of all beings and all the creatures of the manifested universe. This subject, the bearer of divine love, who is everywhere, radiating from the centre of the periphery and embracing all infinity, is expressed in this first Arcanum. The first principle of the bestowal path is the recognition of the spiritual unity of the universe and the affirmation of the potential to create out of oneself a subject of radiating all-encompassing and creative love. The title of the Arcanum is Divine Essence. The masculine principle is a formative principle in nature, which in its essence is eternally creating itself. The subjective consciousness is merged with the ocean of the Absolute Spirit, but in its manifestation it embraces a part of this boundless ocean as the object of its self-manifestation, by putting the seal of the potential of the possibilities contained in it. This subjective consciousness carries in itself, in its potential, all the possibilities of the subsequently manifested cosmos, the knowledge of all its forms, mastery of all laws and forces that unfold in its power spirals. This subjective consciousness, all-encompassing and all-conscious in its depth, which is aware of everything and feels itself in everything, is the synthesis of all the manifestations of great and small consciousnesses. In the fullness of its potential, it carries within itself, as a possibility, the entire universe, and the potency of the affirmation of being, which has been poured out of the spirit by the conscious totality of the worlds, is self-consciousness, that is, a form of consciousness in which the subject is absorbed. It is recognized by the divine subject as a form of its manifestation. This consciousness, when applied to the universe, is called God, that is, a subject that carries within itself and radiates from its inner essence the great and small images and creatures of the world. Self-consciousness, as applied to man, is that form of human consciousness in which everything that has a name or a form is rejected or dissolved in the eternal radiance of the Spirit, which is fundamentally one with God. This is the form of consciousness in which the boundaries between I and you are blurred, and everything is absorbed by the self-radiating love by the Spirit. The first principle of manifestation in man is the very essence of our soul, our inner self, our subject, eternally immersed in itself, never changing in all the changes of its shells, the infinite spirit, always remaining the same, regardless of any changes, no matter what the transformations of our consciousness. The consciousness of oneself in all its transformations, in all its states, in all the aspects of one personality, in all the ideals of one's soul. Here is self-consciousness. It never changes, it never acts, for its possibilities are effectively brought to life by the instruments of its manifestation through the heart, mind, and pain. It is only a constant witness of the changes that are taking place in the spiritual, mental, psychic, and physical shells that hide it. We are separated from it by all the stages of the planes of consciousness, that is, the knowledge and possession of all the manifestations of the ego in the cosmos. And at the same time, it is the inner being of our souls. But to achieve it, we must discard everything that it is not. We must know everything and own everything that we have, then let us reject it, because ignorance and lack of mastery can make us accept some passing stage of consciousness as the reality of our inner self, and this mistake can have serious consequences. Although the truth lies in the realm of subjective consciousness, all the objectivity that lies between us and it must be known and transcended in order to reach it in all its purity. In order to understand God in Himself, there is a method of negating everything that He is not, but it must be emphasized that in order to really master negation, we must know what we reject. Only under these conditions can we merge the sensations of our I with our real spiritual essence. The method of negation is the method of not identifying consciousness with anything that is not essentially it. Know thyself, and thou shalt know the whole world. This is the ancient wisdom inscribed above the temple of initiation. Know thyself as all present, all knowing, all blessed, all holy. The eternal unity of the Spirit and rule over all that is not your I. Do not identify your consciousness with the changing objective forms in which it constantly is clothed. That is, perceive all its manifestations as roles played in the great mystery of life. It does not matter what this role is, because it manifests itself in it. It is one of the potentials of our Great Spirit. What does it matter what the last role is? It will also be a manifestation of the divine self-realization of self-consciousness. At its root, our spiritual self, our inner essence, is eternally fused with the divine essence, the reality manifested in the universe. Therefore, all the beings of the world and all its phenomena are connected together by a common presence in the divine essence, which means that the real connection between us is actually the connection of the manifested spirit. Our mind tries to connect the phenomena of the world with the horizontal lines of the law of causality, but in reality, everything in the world is connected by radii going from the periphery to the centre, and from the centre to the next radius. Through the Spirit, through God, there is a connection between the beings of the world. Therefore, the feeling of connection with the beings of the world, with those near and far, is actually there as sense of their own and their divine essence. And this connection, which exists through God, is called love in the manifested world. Therefore, every manifestation of love is divine, because it establishes a connection that passes through God, and therefore it is impossible not to love your neighbour without love for God, which can be expressed in the search for truth, the desire for spirit, for self-improvement, and so on. A single spiritual essence of the world is impossible, because when we break the connection with the highest, that is, with the centre, we break the connection at the periphery, and then we are separated from each other. A friend with all the illusory shells that stands as an obstacle to mutual understanding and for love. Theoretically, if a person denies God and the Spirit, but his heart is not dead for love, then by this he shows that he subconsciously affirms and recognizes this Spirit. But of course, a theoretical negation, creating false ideas, in the end can distort the consciousness in such a way that it will lose all connection with the spiritual world, and then it will dry up and die for the feeling of love, and will also lose connection with all its loved ones. Thus, the beings who have lost their I become shadows, bringing death and decay into everything. The principle of unity can be achieved only if the unity of consciousness is realized in all life manifestations, that is, under the condition of the verticality of consciousness, when all the manifestations of the planes are grouped around the axis of the set ideal and are brought into the hierarchical order. The nature of this order depends on the potential of self-consciousness, just as the established order of a person depends on the potential of the divine subject manifested in it. The world is like this because such are the potentials of the spirit manifested in it, and such are the personal characteristics of people. This world must strictly correspond to the potential of our spiritual essence unfolding in it. It is impossible to deny the order of the universe. The experience accumulated over thousands of years is constantly being filled with great consciousnesses, detached from their small personalities, who have firmly established in themselves the four planes through which the divine consciousness manifests in the universe. According to this law of the four, which is the basis of every form, the inner potential of the divine spirit is developed. In the symbolic picture, these four stages of the spirit's manifestation are represented by the rod, the cup, the sword, and the moon, which is not there at the top. The rod is held by the Aleph itself, for it symbolizes the principle of the spiritual manifestation itself, and on a cubic stone, again the symbol of the four, three objects lie in front of him as submissive instruments of his positive appearance. In man is a small cosmos. These four planes of consciousness are poured out into forms. Spiritual life and creation of spiritual syntheses, religious and mental searching for the path and building their ideals upon it, that is, the formulation of the world of ideas. Psychic and energetic manifestations of the search for the ideal and service to it, and physical actions that focus spiritual and ideological principles accordingly in the environment of our planet Earth. These correspond to the four Kabbalistic worlds of Atziluth, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. In short, in man, his spirit manifests itself. We are born in a chaos of forms subject to all kinds of changes. Our worldview and world feeling, that is, the area of our psychic life, the area of feelings, must correspond to our worldview, and we should not look in any random likes and dislikes. All subconscious intense experiences must be illuminated by a ray of understanding, either introduced into the general worldview or transformed accordingly. All our actions must be driven by the service of the ideal and guided by our worldview, rather than being the result of random feelings, impulses, or a chaotic reaction to the impact of objectivity. The planes, in brief: spiritual, soul, mental, intelligence, areas of the senses, astral, and physical, etheric body. Therefore, in the construction of inner unity, it is necessary to begin with the establishment of the subjective goals of the search, with a subjective living ideal corresponding to the cosmic reality, and not to fantastic ideas of the intellect detached from the cosmos. Only such a positive person is truly ready to manifest his or her spiritual personality, an entity, a truly cosmic servant, who can develop his or her potential into blazing suns, into driving forces, into real achievements, through the continuous work of self-discovery in the four planes of their coordinated consciousness. Only such a person can really put the imprint of their spirit upon the environment and determine its order, just as God forms the cosmic environment and establishes its unshakable order. Secondly, it is necessary to develop a unitary worldview, which is reduced to a worldview based on the basic principle of this ideal, so that in all this worldview, the knowledge was harmoniously merged with the spiritual axis, but at the same time, it is impossible to close the circle of the possibility of new acquisitions. Thirdly, the growth of consciousness is directed towards infinity, and therefore our ideological intellectual wealth should not be located in a closed circle, but in an upward spiral of all new self-disclosures and objective accumulations. Only the axis of the spiral, the spiritual backbone, must be worked out and remain unchanged and immobile so as not to be destroyed. So I'm just going to repeat that, because I think it's important. The growth of consciousness is directed towards infinity, and therefore our ideological intellectual wealth should not be located in a closed circle, but in an upward spiral of all new self-disclosures and objective accumulations. Only the axis of the spiral, the spiritual backbone, must be worked out and remain unchanged and immobile so as not to be destroyed. Those who read Valentin Tomberg's work, Meditations on the Tarot, will probably recall that he speaks also against closed circles and in favour of the living spiral, where there is always a doorway outward to freedom and growth and expansion, this doorway being Christ. It's also interesting here, and he possibly doesn't highlight this in quite the same way that she also counsels us to retain our spiritual core. And I think this is why we think the Caduceus symbol is really relevant here, because the kind of wand through the centre of the Caduceus is like the backbone, whereas the snake, or like some would call it a Kundalini energy, these are all analogues, not the only representation is that spiral. And people on this spiritual journey will find themselves making many different turns. You know, and by the time you get further up the spiral, maybe it seems so far away from where you began from. But eventually, via the infinity, the sign of infinity, the lemniscate, which again is above the head of the magician there, ensures that you will return back to that primal source. But first you need the experience of the expansion of your own consciousness. In nature on our planet, these four planes of manifestation of the universal spirit would have to manifest in the four realms of nature. Man is called to exist in the ideological and psychic forms of spiritual creation, Bria and Yetzirah, and the animal kingdom is called to realise it in the plane of the earthly intellect, which processes the matter of the earth. The four realms of nature are the accumulators of psychic and physical solar energies. The mineral kingdom is intended to be a single cohesive foundation of all this creativity, fixing it in the realized material forms of the earth. Therefore, every planet is such, down to its material forms, which are the tasks of the manifested potential of the spirit of its representatives. But the human consciousness, called to the realization of spiritual principles, has partially severed its connection with the spirit that feeds it. It falsely realized the identification of its I with its earthly manifestation and earthly tasks, and therefore the consciousness burned out and plunged into the flow of the earthly energy manifestation, and self-consciousness was replaced by egoism. So again, this is important because this is where she's speaking of the fall itself. This is not the failure of one individual, one aspirant. This is the primordial fall of Adam. Human consciousness, called to the realization of spiritual principles, has partially severed its connection with the spirit that feeds it. It falsely realized the identification of its I with its earthly manifestation and earthly tasks, and therefore the consciousness burned out and plunged into the flow of the earthly energy manifestation, and self-consciousness was replaced by egoism. So as individuals, we are fallen sparks. And our goal is to rise again by applying these spiritual principles and exercises. The severing of the spiritual connection with the cosmic spirit caused the weakening of the ties between the immortal soul of man and his earthly personality. His earthly personality ceased to be plastic and flexible, obeying the dictates instead. It submitted to the material flow of the earth. Its shells were roughened, and its physical body was too dense and imperfect. The breaking of the line of consciousness between the immortal soul and its instrument, the personality, made the personality mortal and caused the need for the soul to manifest in many persons by the law of reincarnation. See how the spiral continues. The great creative mind of humanity, which is a part of the cosmic mind, has been replaced in the severed earthly personality by the instrument of its partial manifestation, the earthly intellectual reason. The difference between the mind and the understanding is that the mind is connected with the creative principle of the universe and is the creative principle in man, giving rise to living, effective ideas, living images represented by such a complete reality as the forms generated by the cosmic spirit. The understanding is one of the organs of the mind. The understanding is one of the organs of the mind, created by it for understanding the earthly situation of its manifestation, the earthly facts. Detached from the greater cosmic mind, the individual human mind is unable to truly assess the earthly situation and falls into numerous errors, cannot see the wood for the trees. The feeling in the detached personality of a human being, that is, the direct perception of the essence of things, has turned into impulses from unconscious instincts that are weakly aware of the principle of connection, and into an impulse of reactions to earthly objectivity, that is, passions. I'm pausing because there's an irony in that the channeling of those passions is what can be the engine and the energy which drives us upwards again, provided we can channel it up that straight core, our wand, our spine, our backbone, through discipline. The will of man is his constant striving toward the goal, that is, the divine essence. His intense creative impulse towards the realization of spiritual values turned into egoism, into broken chaotic desires for the possession of earthly objects and achievements. In fact, man, from his royal position as a companion of God, descended to the stage intended for the animals, and by this fall caused the animals to fall. The decline of consciousness into the animal world, usurping its intellectual task and leaving it only chaotic manifestation of distorted mental impulses, instincts, and passions. The vegetable kingdom was protected by the higher powers from the negative influence of the lower man, and if this had not been done by the spirits, the leaders of creativity in the solar system, the earthlings, would have ceased to exist long ago. The plant kingdom remained the only complete and conscious cosmic collaborator which did not break the connection with the world, psychic energy, and constantly transformed it into the generative flow of life force, in the juices that are nourishing and healing, thus taking care of people and animals even in their fall, healing them from the consequences of mental breakdowns and diseases. The growing vegetative kingdom produces fruits and grains in such abundance that they would be enough to feed all the creatures on earth if they turned to this only legitimate way of maintaining their lives. The mineral kingdom was thickened and coarsened by the breakdown of humanity, and its materials ceased to obey the direct formulation of thought. Instead, it requires the application of physical work for its transformation. Thought creation, on the other hand, has an extremely weak effect on it, and the identification of its results requires a long time and direct fixation of the thought in physical form, as well as a long effort and tension, which is necessary even for a disciplined person. In order to achieve one's own spiritual essence and liberate consciousness from false self-identifications, the principle of unselfishness is recommended. To carry out self-denial and selflessness in your daily life, and to lead the eye not to the self-worth that fills the consciousness, but to the way of solving the spiritual task in the work of each day, and to perceive everything as a conscientious performance of the task. Whatever we do, we must remember that all our work is aimed at identifying one of the possibilities. One of the doors. One of the exits from the closed circle. The exit. The universal spirit from the realization of the universal good to the extent that our personality deserves it. To develop such a life attitude, it is recommended to take the following steps. Firstly, separate your physical body from yourself. Analyze this state and understand that the analyzer and the analysed are not the same thing, and that the analyzer in relation to the analysed is a subject separate from the object, independent of it. Do not identify your I with your feelings, so you will master the secret of self-control. Secondly, concentrate on your thoughts, be able to analyse them. Understand that again the subject analyses them, dominating them. The mastery of thoughts leads to the possibility of conscious thought creation. Apply the same analysis to the area of your spiritual and religious life. Understand that the ideal you set is only the revelation of your higher self. By ceasing to identify yourself even with the spiritual ideal, you will achieve self-consciousness, self-immersion in the immortal ocean of your own spirit, merged with the spirit of the universe, and eternally affirming the principle of universal unity. The mantra for the first arcanum is I am, which means I am eternal, immortal, and free. Nothing can destroy me. I can't disappear anywhere. Nothing can harm me. In all the changes of life, I am. The I is the true cause and witness of all changes and all transformations of consciousness.